Greetings, Professor McKee here with the fourth seminar Saturday for the fall semester, and this week we're going to be talking about how companies should be paying for doing acquisitions or mergers. And this is going to be from a paper by Pavel, Savor, and Chi Lu. My apologies if I mangled those names, called Do Stock Mergers Create Value for Acquirers? This was published in the Journal of Finance in 2009. So this is an older paper that was published, and this is a paper that I studied as a graduate student. The professor who teaches one of the finance seminars where I studied always taught this paper when he teaches the class on how to do empirical finance research. So I wanted to do this paper as well. So paying for mergers and acquisitions. What methods do companies use to pay for purchasing another company? I'll give you a hint. They don't use credit cards. They have basically two choices. They can pay in cash, using the company's cash, or they can issue new shares of stock and give them to the owners of the company that's being acquired to pay for it instead. And does it matter how you're paying for the merger? Is what we're going to be focusing on. And it appears as though all stock purchases are bad because there are negative returns when the merger is announced, so that they're going to try to do this merger with this target company, and there are negative returns in the long term after you do the merger. So the market says, oh, this is bad, they're doing a merger. The merger is done, and over the next few years you also have negative returns. But are they actually bad? Because what we are looking at is specifically the payment method. So is the payment method, paying in stock versus using cash, causing our poor performance? Because it could be that all mergers are bad on average. And it also could be, and this is something that the paper dives deep into, is that this poor performance could be a mechanical effect, not caused by the payment method. Because the best time to use stock to pay for things is when the stock price is really high. Kind of obvious, right? And then if the price is very high, when it reverts to a normal price, that's going to force us to have a negative return. So a good way to think about this is something that you might be aware of involving the Sports Illustrated curse. So if an athlete, professional athlete, is on the front page, athlete of the year, which means they are basically considered to be the best athlete across many different sports for that year, people have noticed that that athlete tends to perform poorly the next year. Well, the reason for that isn't because being put on the Sports Illustrated front page makes you perform worse the next year. Like that can't be causing you to do worse. I mean, I guess in theory it could if like the fame is getting to their head, but they're already really famous, successful already. I mean, you have to be in order to be that notable. But what's probably really happening is they had an exceptionally lucky year, and they're coming back to their average. Now, their average is really good because this is a really good, extremely high performance athlete, but they're not as good as they were the previous year because last year everything just went perfectly for them, and this year everything is going more normally for them. It's a mean reversion. So this is the same thing with the stock returns here. It could be that we are just seeing a mean reversion, and it's not the choice of paying with stock that causes the negative returns. It's just that they were exceptionally high, and so of course as they sort of revert to normal, their price is going to go down, and that's going to make returns go down. And there's sort of potentially a self-fulfilling prophecy here too, because by choosing to purchase with stock, management could be telling the market, hey, we think price is too high. And so the market sells off, reducing the price, and that makes the mechanical effect sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. So you might see it timed really precisely right on the merger announcement, but that's not because of the merger. It's because the merger gave us new information that reduces the stock price. Okay, so how are they going to test this? And it's difficult to do. Doing research in mergers and acquisitions is always really hard because companies don't randomly get assigned to become targets or acquirers. They choose, and these are rare. So companies think very carefully before they do mergers. At least they normally do. And so it's very hard to find natural experiments. But the authors seem to have found a pretty good one, which is why it was a paper that one of my professors in grad school really liked. Because many mergers are announced, and only some of them actually get completed. So instead of comparing completed mergers to everyone else, what the authors are going to do is they compare them to companies that attempted and failed to make a merger using stock. So it's people who did a stock merger successfully versus people who tried a stock merger and weren't able to do it. And so that way, both treated and controlled companies were trying to acquire with a share by issuing shares of stock. So if you're trying to cash in on an abnormally high stock price, the ones who complete the merger should do better than the ones that fail. Now, both might go down because their price is they're overpriced. But the ones that fail to buy stuff on the cheap because they're buying with the abnormally high stock price are the ones who are going to do worse, right? So you might say, well, the ones who fail, maybe they have negative 15% return, and the ones who succeed have a negative 10% return. 5 percentage points, it would make that stock merger probably worth it for the acquirer, not a good idea for the target. But that's what we would potentially be looking to see if the mechanical effect story is correct. Now, one concern with looking at failures is that sometimes the failure of the merger happens because there's a problem with the acquirer. Well, then those failures are going to do worse, but it might not be because of a mean reversion. It might be because that acquirer was a little over aggressive in thinking they had the resources when they really didn't. So what you really want are exogenous things, like the regulators look at you and say, no, we're not going to let you merge because of antitrust things, or some other third party sees the merger attempt and goes, oh, that's a nice target. I'm going to buy it at a higher price than what you were offering. Things like that. Or potentially sometimes they get rejected because the target firm, while you're doing that due diligence, something gets revealed that makes the target firm look much less attractive than when you first made that merger announcement. So one sort of example of this very famous one, when Elon Musk decided to acquire Twitter, he signed the agreement and then he started doing due diligence. Usually you do it the other way around, because if you find out things you don't like when you're doing the due diligence, you have the ability to back out. Elon Musk did not have the ability to back out. Actually, I was on a podcast with another faculty at WT discussing that. I'll put a link to our discussion of that back when it was happening in the comment in the description for this video. So these are reasons that are not caused by the acquirer being a bad company, and that's what you want. So the authors go through all the mergers using SDC, which is a very common source, and they take all stock and all cash deals. They drop anything that is mixed. The combinations are going to be harder for them to deal with. They, of course, have stock price returns using CRISP, extremely standard source. Basically, everyone uses that. And they end up with 1,700 deals that are completed and 355 deals that fail. And then they use news article sources, Factiva, so LexisNexis, and Factiva, to investigate why these deals failed, and then they remove things that where they view it as being non-exogenous. So it drops down to 148 failed deals, 72 are stock deals, 76 are cash deals. And they are covering years 1978 through 2003. So about a 25-year period. You might note, we're only talking about 1,700 total deals, maybe 2,000 attempted deals if you add the failed ones. Over 25 years, we're not talking a huge number of deals per year. And indeed, mergers and acquisitions are relatively rare. They're a really big deal, but they're not super common. Well, they look at the returns for the acquirer, and they are looking at the abnormal returns. I've talked about cars in previous weeks, both this semester and I think in previous semesters as well. And so they're looking at the abnormal return compared to overall return. And this first one here, column here, this is just 1 day before, 1 day after the announcement. Then they're going 250, 500 days, 750 days after us. These are longer term returns. This is the initial return. Actually, I believe it's for the completion, not the announcement. And so this column here is our stock. This column here is our cash financed ones. And they don't actually have the stars indicating statistical significance. This is a pretty old paper. It's probably why they don't have it. But if you look at them, if you're above basically 1.96, you're above 5% statistical significance. So they have the difference, B minus A, so failed minus successful. The failed are doing worse. They have negative returns, it's statistically significant. If you go to say we want the exogenous samples, it's still showing up. Again, if you go to exogenous samples, you're cutting your failed by a lot. So they don't usually use this extra restrictive one very much. They use the exogenous failed one a lot. So there's like an extra 13%, 20%, 30%, something like that. Worse if you fail the deal versus when you succeed. That is not the case at all for the cash deals. Whether you succeed or not, it doesn't seem to matter. The company does fine either way. Like it doesn't help them, it doesn't really hurt them. And these are robust to all sorts of alternative specifications of how they are defining things like the number of years, how they define the abnormal return model. There's a ton of robustness things that I'm not going to show because all they're doing is basically lots of extra stuff to show that these main results hold true regardless of tweaking little things. And it's a very asset pricing type of paper. I am not an asset pricing guy. I don't find doing tons and tons and tons of different portfolio sorts and models all that exciting. So I skipped over those. This is going to be a pretty short seminar today. And the one thing I did find pretty interesting was what they call a value versus glamour test. So while most of the paper is robustness tests that support the table I just showed you, there is one additional subsample test that I found interesting. And this is much more of a empirical corporate finance type of test. You're looking at subsamples where you're expecting things to be stronger or weaker. So they can test value stocks versus glamour stocks. And I'm putting those in quotes because they're not really value stocks. If you think about a value stock, that is typically a stock that is undervalued by the market. The price is low, but all of these stocks, if you're issuing just shares of stock for a merger, your price is high. So these are sort of highly valued companies versus very highly valued companies. The glamour ones are above median book-to-market ratio compared to the overall sample of requirers, and the value ones are below median. Now, as the authors note, like everyone is really high, like everyone's way above 50% of the total population of companies because these are all overvalued. So it's just glamour stocks are extra overvalued. And what we would expect is that the glamour guys are really getting a great deal if they actually succeed. Again, if they succeed, and they're gonna need the benefit from the acquisition more. So for the value acquirers, it shows up, and they're getting pretty normal-ish sort of returns. But if you compare these two here, and it would be nice if they kind of showed statistical significance, but they did say it wasn't very strong. And this could be because their subsample doesn't work too well, or it could also just be because their sample size is really small. But if you're a value acquirer and you fail, you lose about 16% return over the next 3 quarters or so. It's 25% for the glamours. 25% versus 39%. And then 38, 39% versus 50% at the 750 mark. So it's it looks worse for the glamour acquirers, and that's what we would expect because they are going to have really bad mean reversion compared to the value acquirers who had just kind of normal mean reversion. And so if you fail at that acquisition, it's going to be worse for you. If you succeed, it's still going to be worse for you. You can see negative 0.18 versus 0.082, 1.25 versus 0.07, 0.09 versus 0.04, even 0.04 versus 0.02. So even the ones that succeed, it seems like the glamour acquirers are doing worse than the value, which again we would expect. But I mean, the real test that you would want to see is you take that difference. Okay, so they're worse by 10%, and then you compare it to here where it's like, well, they're worse by 12, 13%, something like that. That's the kind of double difference in difference you'd be interested in looking at. So it does sort of support their story. It's not a key part of their paper. It's just one table they throw in at the end. But it was an interesting test that I enjoyed looking at and talking about. And that is everything for the paper. It's not actually that short of a paper, but because it's so focused on that single result, that single table I first showed you of, the ones that failed do worse, there's not a lot more to talk about because I don't want to get into all the different robustness specifications that they use. It gets, if you're a PhD student and you're focusing on asset pricing, you might care about that, but otherwise, no. So, while all companies are going to perform worse after attempting an all-stock acquisition, if you fail, particularly if it's for no fault of your own, so it's an exogenous failure, you perform noticeably worse than the ones that succeeded with their all-stock acquisitions. And therefore, they concluded from this paper that it's not the merger that's causing the company to underperform. Rather, the reason it underperforms is that the company was overvalued. And whether management recognized the overvaluation or not, they were trying to take advantage of a really high stock price. And if they succeed, assuming they were presumably buying some sort of real asset that produces cash flow that will keep the company in better shape, when sort of reality ensues and the company's stock price comes back down to a more correct sort of price. And again, it could be that management just says, wow, our price is really high. Let's go out, let's go shopping. Or management could go, we're overvalued. Our price is going to come down soon. We better take advantage of it. I don't think there's a way to disentangle if management knows or suspects overvaluation, or if management just kind of wakes up and says, oh, high stock price. Let's go buy stuff. Either way, it seems like that trying to do the stock acquisition is actually a good idea, and it's beneficial for the shareholders of the acquirer. If you're a target company and someone says, we want to acquire you using stock, you should probably say no. Just flat out always refuse, because it generally is not going to be a good deal for you. Your shareholders are going to be harmed by it. Now, if they offer higher prices, perhaps, but I mean, kind of an obvious conclusion from this is you shouldn't want to accept a stock acquisition offer. You should prefer a cash offer. Or, if they're trying to do all stock instead, you should say, hey, let's do partially stock, partially cash, because, the reason you're doing all stock is because your stock price is coming back down in a year, and I'd like to have some cash as sort of a balance against the likely problems that are going to happen with your stock price in the medium term. All right, so that is everything for this paper. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, just comment, like, and or subscribe so that others can find this series too. And we will continue with some working papers, a lot of working papers from Western Finance Association, a very elite conference, in the following weeks for the semester. So I'll see y'all next week.